Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Tuesday, 3rd June 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Australia is actively strengthening its security posture, with Japan-Australia ties rapidly evolving and driving the push for trilateral security arrangements. Despite focusing on trilateral cooperation, Australia's defence chief dismissed the idea of an Asia Pact. To bolster maritime security in the region, Australia will gift a Guardian-class patrol boat to the Maldives, a gesture announced by Deputy PM Richard Marles during his South Asia visit. The Reserve Bank of Australia stands ready to respond decisively to any downturn in the global economy, even considering rapid cash rate cuts if tariffs imposed by Donald Trump destabilize markets further. A 50 basis point cut was considered last month, but not implemented. Social housing challenges persist within Australia as waitlists grew by over 26,000 households in the 6 years up to 22. While the availability of social housing decreased by 6,400 households, according to the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute. Meanwhile, Vanuatu's climate minister criticised Australia for extending the North West Shelf gas project until 2070, questioning Australia's environmental leadership as it seeks to co-host the COP31 summit with Pacific nations in Adelaide. The United States is facing economic headwinds, with the OECD forecasting a slowdown in growth from 2.8% last year to 1.6% this year, attributed to disruptions stemming from President Donald Trump's trade wars, which have elevated costs and created business uncertainty. In response to surprise U.S. tariffs on steel, the European Union is preparing countermeasures, complicating ongoing trade negotiations between Brussels and Washington. Tensions between the U.S. and China escalated during the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum, with Washington warning of the threat posed by China. A formal Pacific Collective Defense Pact involving the United States, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines has been proposed by Ely Ratner, a former senior US official, to deter China's military ambitions, a move analysts fear could exacerbate regional tensions. The U.S. State Department is implementing performance metrics for American ambassadors in Africa, assessing them based on the number of business deals they facilitate, aligning with the U.S. government's new trade, not aid strategy. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick expressed optimism regarding a potential U.S.-India trade deal, urging New Delhi to open its markets, reduce arms purchases from Moscow, and reduce its alignment with BRICS. Admiral Samuel Paparo, head of US Indo-Pacific Command, warned that Beijing was on a dangerous course and that its operations around Taiwan were not mere exercises but rehearsals. Amid rising concerns and US government efforts to limit educational ties between the US and China, a conservative newspaper alleged a widespread operation by Chinese spies at Stanford University. Experts suggest that US President Donald Trump's attempts to pressure China into trade negotiations through export controls are unlikely to succeed. A senior member of US President Donald Trump's economic team indicated on Sunday that Trump may speak with China's President Xi Jinping very soon, hoping to break the trade impasse between the two economic powerhouses. North Macedonia has announced plans to eliminate all import taxes on the United States, aiming for a reciprocal zero-tariff agreement with the Trump administration. In Colorado, Mohammed Sabri Solomon, the suspect in a Boulder flamethrower attack, told police he targeted a Zionist group, with witnesses reporting Molotov cocktails being thrown. Mohammed Sabri Solomon has been charged with a federal hate crime in the U.S., with Attorney General Pam Bondi vowing to prosecute him to the law's fullest extent. A massive cloud of dust from the Sahara Desert is currently blanketing most of the Caribbean, marking the largest event of its kind this year as it moves towards the United States. China's relations with the U.S. remain strained, as evidenced by the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum, where Washington warned of the threat of China. China is actively engaging with regional partners, as the leaders of ASEAN, the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, and China convened for an inaugural summit in Kuala Lumpur, focusing on enhanced cooperation in trade, supply chains, infrastructure, finance, green energy, digital transformation, connectivity, and sustainable agriculture. Amid online buzz and as government efforts to limit educational ties between the US and China, a conservative newspaper alleged a widespread operation by Chinese spies at Stanford University. Experts suggest that President Donald Trump's attempts to pressure China into trade negotiations through export controls are unlikely to succeed. A senior member of President Donald Trump's economic team indicated on Sunday that Trump may speak with China's president while hoping to break the trade impasse between the two economic powerhouses. Well, Admiral Samuel Paparo, head of US Indo-Pacific Command, warned that Beijing was on a dangerous course and that its operations around Taiwan were not mere exercises but rehearsals. In the United Kingdom, the US private equity group PER has withdrawn from a deal to inject fresh equity into Thames Water, raising the possibility of a temporary nationalization of the UK's biggest water supplier. Several publishing groups have been in the news. The far-right US publisher Passage Press is now part of Foundation Publishing Group and is connected to Network Press, whose only title to date is an effective accelerationist manifesto by tech right venture capitalist Mark Andreessen. Right-wing publisher Arc Press is connected to Chapter House, which Lizzie, a literary scenista in Los Angeles, co-founded as an independent publisher of poetry, sci-fi, and esoterica, but now a homeschooling resource. United Kingdom. Labour Human Rights Lawyer. Helena Kennedy is pressing the UK government to sanction Egyptian officials over the ongoing detention of British-Egyptian activist Alaa Abd el Fattah, suggesting a case at the International Court of Justice. UK ministers are weighing approval for the Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk, potentially announced by Keir Starmer at an upcoming UK-France summit with EDF. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, has challenged the government's explanation of rising small boat crossings as solely weather-related, following a Home Office report connecting the two. British police have arrested a fourth man concerning fires at properties and a vehicle linked to Keir Starmer. The Guardian's Young Country Diary series is currently accepting nature-focused submissions from children aged 8-14. Separately, Andrew Che Sitbong received a full refund from Barclays Bank in the UK after losing money. Ukraine and Russia. As attacks intensify between Ukraine and Russia, Donald Trump has stated he is open to attending peace talks in Turkey if both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky participate. Past peace talks occurred in Istanbul, where Moscow dismissed demands for an unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine has increased its drone operations against Russia, with President Zelensky stating Operation Spiderweb has seriously weakened Russian military operations. These attacks, including one deep inside Russia that set fire to aircraft, showcase Ukraine's drone capabilities against distant targets and expensive aircraft. Ukraine claimed attacks destroyed over 40 Russian warplanes, including nuclear-capable bombers, while Russia reported successful repulsions with no casualties. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry announced that Ukraine and Russia concluded their latest round of direct peace talks in Istanbul, with Turkish representatives present, resulting in an agreement to trade more prisoners, but with few steps towards ending the fight. The meeting followed a Russian attack in Zaporizhia, Ukraine. New Zealand. Sean Le Cairns, a 26-year-old Kiwi, died in Ukraine at the start of April, becoming the fourth known New Zealander to die in the country. In Auckland, a woman who mistakenly received $158,000 from a pensioner due to a bank error pleaded not guilty and was granted name suppression citing undue hardship. Israeli military actions in Gaza have resulted in significant casualties and international concern. On multiple occasions, Israeli forces opened fire near aid distribution sites, resulting in the deaths of at least 27 Palestinians in one incident and at least 3 in another, with scores wounded. The incidents occurred as people sought aid, with some reports indicating the shootings took place both at and a kilometer away from the distribution points. The Israeli military stated that troops fired warning shots or targeted individuals who deviated from designated access routes near the distribution centers, claiming some were suspects approaching their forces. A Gaza spokesperson alleged that Israel used tanks and drones in the attacks. An Israeli strike on a residential building in Gaza resulted in the deaths of 14 Palestinians, mostly women and children. Sources claim Israeli strikes on Gaza schools, sheltering displaced people are part of a deliberate military strategy, with at least 6 school buildings struck in recent months, reportedly killing over 120 people. Ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas have stalled due to disagreements over a permanent versus temporary truce. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for an independent inquiry into the mass shooting of Palestinians by Israeli forces near a Gaza aid site. Turning to the United States, Mohammed Sabri Solomon has been charged with a federal hate crime for allegedly attacking a pro-Israeli rally in Boulder, Colorado, using a makeshift flamethrower, injuring 12 people. Solomon, who posed as a gardener, allegedly planned to kill everyone in a group he called Zionist. 8 people were injured in the violence, which unfolded amid heightened tensions due to the Israel-Hamas war, which has contributed to a spike in anti-Semitic violence in the U.S. Japan is addressing economic and social issues through new policies and initiatives. A new law aims to regulate unconventional kira names inspired by pop culture. Support is being enhanced for the Ice Age generation in their 40s and 50s to improve their employment prospects. To boost competitiveness, Japan is promoting the use of AI and attracting foreign talent in intellectual property. As prices soar, shoppers are queuing to buy cheap rice from government stockpiles. Iris Oyama is the first retailer to sell it. Retail prices for rice averaged $4,260, $29.80 per 5 kilograms. A plan to reintroduce wolves, extinct for over a century, is being considered to address agricultural damage from monkeys and deer. Revenue from Japan's departure tax reached a record high in fiscal year 2024 due to increased tourism. Bank of Japan Gov. Kazuo Ueda stated that interest rates will continue to rise if the economy and prices align with the BOE's outlook, acknowledging uncertainty regarding U.S. tariffs. Government efforts to accelerate pay increases could lead to the failure of poorly performing companies. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba may dissolve the House of Representatives for a snap general election if a no-confidence motion is submitted. TMC has cited traffic as the cause of delays at its new plant in Japan due to infrastructure strain from the influx of workers. The EU has approved a fighter jet joint venture between Japan, the UK, and Italy, with the joint venture in Britain overseeing design, manufacturing, and delivery. Turning to China, 2 Japanese nationals were killed in Dalian, Liaoning province, due to a business dispute with a Chinese acquaintance. Chinese police have detained a suspect. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian confirmed that the incident stemmed from a business dispute between acquaintances. Finally, Hegseth-Seld speech indicated that Japan isn't panicking about Trump's foreign policy. China faces escalating trade friction with the United States, each accusing the other of violating their Geneva Trade Agreement. China alleges the U.S. has implemented discriminatory restrictive measures, particularly criticizing U.S. export controls on AI chips, the halting of chip design software sales, and potential revocation of Chinese student visas. These restrictions also jeopardize China's ambitions to develop its own passenger jet, hindering access to vital American engine technology. Domestically, Beijing is concerned about intense price wars among car makers, seeing them as a threat to product quality and long-term sector development, with the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology actively addressing this. The unannounced removal of a top Chinese official in Hong Kong was described as normal by the Hong Kong leader, though Beijing and Chinese state media have remained silent on the matter. In international relations, the Philippines has called on China to engage in good faith negotiations over the South China Sea, stressing the need for China to earn Manila's trust. Amidst these challenges, Chinese companies like PopMart are gaining international recognition, potentially pioneering a new model for cultural exports, with their collectible character Labu drawing comparisons to Sanrio's Hello Kitty. The United States is locked in a trade dispute with China, each alleging breaches of their Geneva Agreement. The U.S. has imposed export restrictions on AI chips and chip design software, and is considering revoking visas for Chinese students. China views these actions as violations of the trade truce. In response to these restrictions, NVIDIA is developing a new AI chip specifically tailored for the Chinese market to comply with U.S. export regulations, with plans to produce over 1 million units this year. Taiwan is strengthening its naval defenses amid growing pressure from mainland China, with plans to test a domestically developed kamikaze sea drone later this month. The drone, created by the National Changshan Institute of Science and Technology, NCSDIST, will undergo combat capability evaluation. The Philippines has urged China to engage in sincere negotiations regarding the South China Sea, emphasizing the need for China to build trust with Manila. European Union member states have voted to restrict access to their procurement markets for Chinese medical device manufacturers for EU tenders exceeding €5 million over a 5-year period. This action follows unsuccessful negotiations with China regarding market access. Boeing anticipates that Chinese airlines will resume placing orders that were paused during the trade war, with CEO Kelly Ortberg stating that Chinese airlines have confirmed they would begin taking deliveries of Boeing planes this month. However, analysts caution that supply chain constraints and tariff uncertainties could potentially slow down these deliveries. Heavy rainfall in southwestern China's Yunnan province has caused riverside houses to collapse due to flooding and landslide. Investor interest in Chinese fresh drink makers, such as Nixie Group, may be excessive, potentially leading to increased competitive spending among these companies, according to S&P Global Rating. South Korea is currently holding a snap presidential election due to the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol, stemming from his controversial imposition of martial law in December, which resulted in extensive protests and subsequent political instability. Yoon now faces a criminal trial concerning these actions. Millions of South Koreans are casting their ballots in an election that commenced at 6 a.m., seeking a leader who can stabilize the nation and manage a divided domestic and international environment. Voter turnout is notably high, although some younger protesters have voiced dissatisfaction with the available candidates. Lee Jae-myung, representing the Democratic Party, is considered the frontrunner, buoyed by public discontent with Yoon's policies. Kim Moon-soo, another contender for the presidency, has publicly apologized for his earlier opposition to former President Park Chung-hee, even laying flowers at Park's gravesite. The incoming president will be confronted with considerable challenges both domestically and internationally. Ukraine and Russia's negotiations in Istanbul wrapped up without a ceasefire, although a prisoner exchange was agreed upon, involving at least 1,000 prisoners and the remains of approximately 6,000 soldiers. A direct meeting facilitated by the White House is expected to occur in Turkey. Separately, Ukraine executed surprise drone attacks on airfields in 5 Russian regions, causing aircraft fires and highlighting Ukraine's advanced drone technology. Russia indicated it would only end the war if Ukraine ceded significant territory. Following a Russian airstrike in Sumy that killed 3 civilians, President Volodymyr Zelensky demanded strong international sanctions and a ceasefire, accusing Russia of targeting civilians intentionally. Human Rights Watch has also accused Russia of using drones to target Ukrainian civilians and called for accountability for these alleged war crimes. Shifting to the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, referencing growing Russian aggression, unveiled extensive rearmament plans, including the construction of up to 12 attack submarines. The UK has been evaluating its defense spending since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Turning to the United States, senators are increasing pressure to advance a severe Russia sanctions bill. The White House is also working towards an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, with a direct meeting expected in Turkey this week. India remains focused on international relations, balancing security concerns and economic opportunities. Shashi Tharoor stated, India will only engage in dialogue with Pakistan after demonstrable action against terrorist infrastructure. The US and India are in active discussion regarding a trade deal, with Howard Lutnick suggesting an agreement is imminent. US trade negotiators are currently in India working toward the first phase of a bilateral trade agreement, which Asha Vance called a time of great opportunity. Russia has confirmed the delivery of remaining S-400 missile systems to India by 2026. Russia also signaled intent to expand bilateral cooperation to include air defense and anti-drone systems. Air India has broadened its codeshare partnership with Air Mauritius, improving connectivity between India and several African nations, including South Africa, Reunion, and Madagascar. Regarding relations with the United Kingdom, a UK minister discussed border security with Indian officials in April. However, the UK Home Office reported a 45% increase in detained Indian nationals by immigration authorities, including individuals scheduled for return to India. Pakistan is actively seeking international support for its regional role and advocating for the reinstatement of the Indus Waters Treaty, which India suspended following the Pahalgam terror attack. The nation recently experienced an earthquake leading to a series of prison breaks. In one incident, over 200 prisoners escaped during an evacuation. Authorities have recaptured over 80. Separately, in Karachi, over 100 inmates escaped after being moved due to earthquake tremors, and one inmate was killed in a related shootout. Concerns about the safety of women, particularly those in the public eye, have increased after TikTok. Star Sana Yousaf was murdered in her home, prompting a police investigation. Poland is now facing political turbulence as Prime Minister Donald Tusk plans a vote of confidence in his government. This action follows the presidential runoff victory of Karol Nawrocki, a right-wing conservative historian and Eurosceptic. Nawrocki, previously unknown to many Poles, received an endorsement from President Trump. His win highlights an ideological clash within Poland against Tusk's pro-European centrist government. Tusk also intends to introduce several draft laws to further solidify his position. Iran faces a critical juncture as it considers rejecting U.S. proposals concerning its nuclear program, steadfastly asserting its entitlement to domestic uranium enrichment. Sources close to Iranian diplomacy reveal that the U.S. proposals fail to address this core demand and lack a concrete strategy for lifting U.S. economic sanctions. This position is reinforced by a recent UN watchdog report highlighting Iran's growing stockpile of near-weapons-grade enriched uranium. Iran defends its nuclear activities as peaceful endeavors, refuting any aspirations for nuclear weapon development. former U.S. President Donald Trump previously stated his intention to demand the complete dismantling of Tehran's nuclear program and a ban on uranium enrichment. Cairo recently hosted a meeting between Iranian, Egyptian, and UN leaders to discuss Iran's nuclear program. Germany's legal system has recently challenged border control practices. A Berlin court found that border police illegally turned away asylum seekers at the Polish border. This action violated EU law regarding the handling of asylum claims. The court mandated that German federal police must assess asylum requests, even from those arriving from other EU nations. This ruling creates obstacles for the government's attempts to limit land migration. Simultaneously, German police are actively engaged in new search operations in Portugal. The search is centered around the area where Madeleine McCann, a British toddler, vanished in 2007. These efforts are part of the ongoing German investigation into the McCann case. Mexico's recent judicial elections, championed by President Claudia Sheinbaum, saw a voter turnout of only 13%, which he hailed as a total success. This figure raises concerns about the legitimacy of the process, as it represents one of the lowest turnouts in any federal election since Mexico's democratic transition. Early vote count suggests the ruling Morena party is likely to secure control over the Supreme Court. Due to campaign restrictions, candidates such as Dora Martinez Valero have turned to social media platforms like TikTok and Tinder to campaign, sometimes in polarizing ways. As seen in her Mexico City campaign video, South Africa is currently holding an inquest into the 1985 murders of the Cradock. 4. A former general denied ordering the assassinations. The families of the victims seek justice after nearly 4 decades. Separately, a Trump-era program has allowed 2 groups of white South Africans to resettle in the United States as refugees. Morocco's Casablanca Finance City aims to become a key hub for international investment in Africa. The city seeks to build on its established commercial history. CFC has faced criticism for potentially masking inequalities within Morocco. Across Africa, humanitarian crises are reportedly underreported and neglected. A recent report identifies these emergencies as the most overlooked globally. Poland is currently facing political turbulence as Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced a confidence vote following the presidential election of Karol Nawrocki, a nationalist with ties to Donald Trump. Nawrocki's victory has been celebrated by far-right figures in Europe, adding to the tension with Tusk's progressive government. Turning to France, President Emmanuel Macron has proposed extending the country's nuclear deterrent to its European allies, sparking debate about the potential impact of a French nuclear umbrella on the continent's security architecture. The Netherlands finds its government in a precarious position after Geert Wilders, leader of the far right, pulled his support from the ruling coalition. The withdrawal stems from a disagreement over immigration policy, specifically Wilders' proposed 10-point plan to halt asylum seeker immigration, which coalition partners rejected. The Netherlands government has fallen after Geert Wilders, leader of the far-right TVV party, pulled his support due to irreconcilable differences on immigration and asylum policy. Wilders stated that his party's ministers would resign after informing Prime Minister Dick Schoof of his decision. This action effectively dissolves the 11-month-old coalition government. The dispute centered on the government's inability to implement what Wilders termed the strictest migration policy ever. The collapse comes at an awkward time for the country, just weeks before it is set to host a significant NATO summit. Malaysia is currently navigating a complex landscape of economic and political issues. Public outcry has met the government's proposal to use artificial intelligence for issuing speeding tickets, with critics suggesting a focus on financial gain over genuine safety improvements, and the need to tackle the persistent problem of accidents involving heavy vehicles. Shifting focus to Kelantan, the state government is considering tapping into its rare earth reserves to reduce its debt burden and boost the local economy. An agreement has been formalized with Linas, an Australian mining firm, for rare earth exploration, though the state is seeking further financial support from the federal government to build the required infrastructure. Meanwhile, at the national level, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's administration is facing political instability after 2 cabinet members unexpectedly stepped down, potentially opening the door for UMNO, the country's former dominant political force, to increase its sway in cabinet nominations and possibly orchestrate a political comeback. Canada is seeing Hudson's Bay Company stores shuttering, including the Ottawa downtown location, resulting in clearance sales. Meanwhile, Manitoba and Saskatchewan are struggling with numerous out-of-control wildfires. The smoke from these fires has severely impacted air quality in parts of the northern United States. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are experiencing the effects. Access to some areas within Canada has also been restricted. South Sudan is facing renewed turmoil as aid groups report numerous civilian casualties. Airstrikes amidst clashes between the National Army and local militias are allegedly responsible. Dozens are reported killed or badly injured. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is facing increasing scrutiny over its environmental policies. Critics argue that the nation's oil and gas sector is undermining its climate change commitments. The debate centers on balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability. In the United States, the Federal Reserve recently announced another interest rate hike. This move aims to combat persistent inflation, and the decision is expected to impact borrowing costs for consumers and businesses across the country. Nigeria is currently struggling with devastating floods and dealing with the fallout from a controversial military action. Catastrophic flooding, the worst in 6 decades, has killed at least 150 people. Thousands more have been displaced as homes along the Niger River have been destroyed. The seasonal flooding typically occurs between April and October, but in Mokwa, flood victims are mourning the loss of life, searching for missing bodies amid fears they may never be found. Meanwhile, Amnesty International is demanding an investigation into a military airstrike in Zamfara State, northwest Nigeria. The strike resulted in at least 20 deaths, leading Amnesty International to condemn the attack as reckless. United States policymakers are now grappling with the strategic implications of China's dominance in rare earth metal production, a sector the U.S. once led. This shift presents economic vulnerabilities, as China could potentially limit the supply of these critical materials used in rare earth magnets, essential for numerous technological and defense applications. Simultaneously, firearms technology from the United States has proliferated globally, with individuals like Elias Anderson using readily available resources to manufacture weapons such as the Printax rifle in remote locations. Indonesia is currently grappling with internal pressures as calls grow for the removal of Health Minister Budi Sadikin, spurred by escalating disagreements with medical professionals that threaten healthcare reforms and public trust. Adding to concerns, the Indonesian Health Ministry has issued a regional alert regarding the increasing spread of COVID-19 outbreaks across Southeast Asia, noting that the XCC variant is currently the dominant strain within Indonesia. Neighboring Thailand is also battling significant outbreaks, with the EC and JN1 variants taking hold. Shifting focus to Singapore, the nation is monitoring the spread of LF7 and NB1.8 variants. Meanwhile, Hong Kong is experiencing a surge in cases linked to the JN1 variant. France's President Emmanuel Macron engaged in discussions with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in Rome, focusing on shared objectives amidst acknowledged differences in perspective. Adding a personal touch, novelist Joyce Maynard embarked on an impromptu 4-day road trip through southern France, uncovering hidden gems such as Le Love Room. Turning to Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni hosted French President Emmanuel Macron in Rome, aiming to identify common ground for cooperation despite their distinct political stances. Italy's Mount Etna, the highest active volcano in Europe, erupted, creating a dramatic spectacle. The eruption sent a plume of ash, gas, and rock into the sky. Reddish clouds descended from the southeast summit. Experts predict the volcanic activity could persist for weeks. New Zealand's former Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has reflected on the challenges of balancing leadership and motherhood. Meanwhile, the tech job market in New Zealand faces difficulties due to artificial intelligence and an economic downturn. Job advertisements in the ICT sector saw a 7% increase from March to April, suggesting a potential recovery. However, employers are still cautious about hiring. Peru's Ministry of Culture has drawn criticism for shrinking the protected zone around the Nazca lines. The reduction cuts the area by nearly 50%. Archaeologists and environmentalists worry about increased illegal mining. The Nazca lines are a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a popular tourist destination. These geoglyphs are over 2,000 years old. Kenya mourns the loss of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the celebrated writer and anti-colonial voice, who passed away at 87. His extensive body of work, including novels, plays, and memoirs, vividly depicted the injustices of colonialism within Kenya. A key moment in his career was writing the first modern novel in the Kikuyu language while imprisoned, famously using toilet paper. Due to his critical stance, he spent many years in exile. Sweden's government is now considering a complete halt to international adoptions after a commission detailed widespread abuse and fraud over several decades. The investigation exposed instances of child trafficking and adoptions occurring without proper parental consent. In the latest from Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new measures to combat online hate speech. The proposed legislation aims to hold social media companies accountable for harmful content shared on their platform. The government plans to establish a regulatory body to oversee the enforcement of these new rules. Turning to the United States, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case concerning voting rights in Alabama. The central issue revolves around whether the state's congressional map dilutes the voting power of black residents. The court's decision could have significant implications for redistricting across the country. Cambodia will lodge a complaint with the International Court of Justice regarding its borders with Thailand, Prime Minister Hun Manet announced, following a recent skirmish that resulted in the death of a Cambodian soldier. Turning to China, Professor Zhong Xiao, an award-winning mathematician, has returned to his home country after nearly 3 decades in Finland. He is bringing his foundational research critical to artificial intelligence back to China and has joined Sun Yat-sen University full-time. In Myanmar, the 2021 military coup and subsequent civil war have severely disrupted the supply of materials for Chinlone bowls, threatening the survival of the ancient Myanmar bowl game. Meanwhile, in Mongolia, Prime Minister Loves Anamsrain Oyun-Erdene resigned after losing a confidence vote. He will remain as caretaker prime minister until a successor is appointed within 30 days. Switching continents, in Mali, an al-Qaeda-linked group, JANIM, launched an assault on a Malian army base in Timbuktu, utilizing a vehicle packed with explosives. This attack followed JANIM's claim of responsibility for a separate attack near the border with Burkina Faso. Moving to the Middle East, Qatar's proposed $7 billion power plan for Syria is contingent on Syria repairing its dilapidated power grid, which has been severely damaged by years of neglect and ongoing looting of cables and components. Over in Europe, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty journalist Farid Mirzalizadeh could face up to 12 years in an Azerbaijani prison for explaining economics. Across the Atlantic in Canada, Smoke from nearly 200 wildfires is triggering air quality alerts across the Midwest and has now spread as far south as Georgia and the Carolinas in the United States. In Guatemala, a Guatemalan court has ordered the arrests of Colombia's Attorney General and a former Colombian defense minister who previously led a UN anti-corruption mission in Guatemala. Finally, in Oceania, Barbara Mali's suspension as anti-corruption commissioner was rescinded, and appointments were revoked in the Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption, FICAC Saga. Mali was appointed in September, and in Vanuatu, Andrew Tate reportedly obtained a golden passport. In the same month, he was arrested in Romania on charges of rape and human trafficking. He reportedly acquired citizenship through a $130,000 investment scheme. Bulgaria is steadily progressing toward its long-sought goal of Eurozone membership. Despite this progress, the nation grapples with challenges, including disinformation, campaigns aimed at undermining public trust in the euro. Turning to the United States, former President Trump's trade policies primarily reshaped global trade flows, with their overall impact remaining limited. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.